Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing fabulous. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story, because it's very intriguing. It's an incredible mystery, because we've just learnt that Mrs. Bromaway got the worst possible phone call that you could ever get, discovering that her father had been killed in a mysterious, enigmatic way, and the body was found in such a peculiar way where the body parts were literally distributed all over an oak tree in the front yard. And more ominous than that, his decapitated head had been left on the front doorstep on the mat, as if to say, as if he was leaving some kind of invisible message, whoever he was, saying, don't mess with me, or this could happen to you. So we're about to find out what it was that killed Mr. Bromaway. And no prizes for guessing what that could be, I wonder. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 2 of our story tonight. I know this is going to sound impossible to believe, Mrs. Bromaway, and you probably do not even believe in such things. But my wife is certain it was a dogman that killed your father. She told Fish and Game as much when they came over to your father's premises to investigate the scene, especially after the coroner told them that your father had been mauled and attacked by a wild animal of canine origin. When Peggy said this to them, they shut her down at once, as if she was being absolutely ridiculous. But the suspicious way they reacted, Mrs. Bromaway, to your father's death leads me to believe they know far more than they care to admit. I think my wife is on to something. I really do. I've never believed in cryptic creatures myself, but now I'm not so sure. Let's not kid. Since I've lived out here in Montana, since me and Peggy moved into our cottage, strange, abnormal things have happened to me and Peggy over the years. We've seen things, heard things that we could not explain. Your father always believed something didn't want him living in his cottage, but I told him he was talking absolute baloney. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe his gut instincts were right after all. I don't know what to think, Mrs. Bromaway, about his senseless death. It's outlandishly bizarre, paradoxical. As I was saying, are you telling me that Fish and Game actually came over to the property? Is that what you're saying? Yes, that's right. They were called out, as I was saying, to your father's property. They did a thorough search, armed to the nines with high-powered ammo, which suggested to me they were almost certainly looking for something. But they were not remotely forthcoming, very cagey, I have to say, and appeared ambiguously evasive. I don't know what to say. That sounds absolutely extraordinary. Suspicious, even. Why on earth would they arrive on my father's property with high-powered ammo if they didn't have a jolly good idea what they were actually looking for? My guess is they know exactly what killed my father. How long were they on the property for? They were on the land from first light to late evening, searching the sprawling wilderness around these parts, with what I would describe as a fine tooth comb. But of course they found nothing. I knew they wouldn't. I have no idea exactly what they were looking for, but I have my suspicions. Let's just say their ineffectual endeavours were completely fruitless. It was written very revealingly over their tired, resigned faces that they had not been successful in their hollow, unproductive expedition. I hasten to say they were tight-lipped, cautiously circumspect. They were asking me and my wife all kinds of strange questions. Really? What on earth were they asking you? Well, if I'd seen anything queer or abnormal on my property. But given they were so remiss, to tell me anything themselves. I told them nothing likewise. I mean, why should I? They had been very indeterminate and very vague towards us. Suffice to say, they warned me and the wife to be incredibly careful, always on our guard, especially at night, and never to go out into the woods late at night without our rifles. I get the sense they know exactly what harmed your father. But you know what these people are like. They're keeping storm. Call it an instinct if you like, but something like what happened to your father has almost certainly happened to somebody else. But they've been keeping it all very cloak and dagger, if you know what I mean. No one is allowed to speak of these things, or they shut you down. They pretty much warned me and Peggy, told us we were to tell anyone that asked that your father was killed by a bear. Can you believe that? It's ridiculous because he wasn't killed by a bear. Of course he wasn't. You will be very glad to know, Mrs. Bromaway, that I was very fortunate to see your father before he died. He was in jolly good form. He had dinner with me and Peggy the day before. The very next evening we were going to repeat the whole experience, this time playing darts and having dinner. Oh, I see. So that's why you knew something was up, because he never rocked up. Is that what you're telling me? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Your father never pitched. I went to find out what on earth was going on. What I failed to mention, Mrs. Bromaway, while we're on the subject, there was another thing that was also disturbing. It wasn't just the state of your husband's body that was found in such a disfiguring shape, but whoever killed your father really did a number on the cottage, breaking windows indiscriminately, damaging stuff, throwing mud and grass over all the interior space. I mean, there were drawers pulled out of cupboards, your father's things lying scattered haphazardly everywhere, and the mattress in his king-size bed had been attacked by a huge pair of claws, and the stuffing was lying all over the room. The cottage will need a little fixing up, I'm sure, so you'll need to go through your father's things. He told me once he'd left everything to you in his will, Mrs. Bromaway. I am very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Bromaway. Naturally, it goes without saying I will give you all the essential details concerning your father's body, and how to get in touch with the coroner about how to proceed from here. I understand your father wanted to be cremated, his ashes scattered in the meadow near the cottage. I know he loved that spot. I appreciate you contacting me, Mr. Sorry, I don't actually know your name. How rude of me. My father did actually mention both of you on numerous occasions, but I'm so dreadful with names. Oh, you must forgive me, Mrs. Bromaway. I do apologize. It's me that's being rude. The name is Falconer, Andreas Falconer. I've been your father's neighbour for the last 10 years. We bought our cottages round about the same time together. Oh, yes, I seem to remember him telling me that. Well, you see, in the beginning there were 4 cottages, built by the landowner on his sprawling ranch that he'd built for his 4 children. I understand he wanted his family, which meant his 4 adult children, and hopefully grandchildren to follow, living in close proximity to the main ranch. His plan was for them to live close enough to him, but at the same time to enjoy their own independence. I know his children were all grown up, but 2 of them chose not to live in 2 of the cottages on his ranch, moving far away from Montana, much to his disappointment. I believe 2 of his adult daughters had married men that needed to work in booming cities for their jobs. One of his daughters lives in Houston, I believe, the other in San Diego. The rancher's name is Atlas Angalis. Atlas is Greek and his wife Diane is Californian, which is why he moved out to America in the early 80s, after he met her on a visit to Greece. I think he comes from a farming family that grew olives for a living. I think oranges as well, perhaps, I'm not sure. I vaguely remember. You see, the Greeks, they love their families being together. They love huge gatherings. I don't know if you've seen my big fat Greek family wedding before, when it came out. It would seem Atlas's family's setup is uncannily similar to that. They occasionally have these huge get-togethers. Anyway, to cut to the chase, Atlas chose to sell 2 of the cottages on his land that he had painstakingly constructed for his children, where he assumed they would ultimately live with their respective families. It was not to be. Atlas, being a thrifty businessman, decided to sell those cottages, since they were lying empty. Your father brought one of them, and I brought the other one, that was next door to his, but on sizable plots of land, of course. So over the years we became good friends, being next-door neighbours as you do, if you know what I mean.
I know, Mr. Falconer. My father told me all this, how he came to buy the cottage. But I'm glad you reminded me of these details because I'd forgotten most of them. I thanked Mr. Falconer for his call, assured him I'd be seeing him and his wife shortly, and then I dropped onto the kitchen floor in a crumpled heap, sobbing my heart out. I was numb with the horror of it all. My father was dead. I was never going to see him again. The mortifying thought cut me to the quick. Something or someone, who might not even be human, had brutally killed him, with absolutely no regard for his life. I had cried an ocean of tears. I had got through an entire box of tissues. It was early on a Saturday morning, with the bright morning sun casting her gleaming shadows across our kitchen, so even the marble flooring became moderately warmer. My husband had seen that my side of the bed was empty. He had falsely assumed I'd gone out for a morning walk, as I was going to take our elderly next-door neighbour's beagle Sophie for a jaunt around our neighbourhood, as Mrs. van Rensburg was still unfortunately recovering from hip replacement surgery, so I was helping her out by walking her dog. My husband had taken a shower. He waltzed into the kitchen with a white towel knotted around his waist. He smelt strongly of lemon soap and coconut shampoo. He came into the kitchen to make some coffee for himself. He stopped short in his tracks when he saw my beleaguered, dishevelled form, propped up against the glossy white kitchen cabinets. I was blowing into a tissue, while a confetti of scrunched-up tissues were lying around me, like white peonies. I barely noticed my husband. I stared blankly into space with red puffy eyes, haunted by the horror of Mr. Falconer's startling revelations. It was bad enough my father was dead, but to be killed in such a grotesque, unseemly manner was not easy for me to stomach by any manner of means. On seeing me propped up on the floor, my husband almost jumped out of his skin, looking as startled as a rabbit surprised by the appearance of a fox.
"What the hell, Jamie? You gave me quite the shock. I thought when I saw your side of the bed empty this morning that you were out walking Mrs. van Rensburg's dog. What's the matter with you? Goodness gracious, your face is all blotchy."
Freddie dropped to his knees. He grabbed my hand in his to offer me comfort. His disquieted face contorted in concern.
"What on earth is the matter, Jamie? Are you all right? You're scaring me. Look at you. Your eyes are red. You've been crying. Oh, my word, you have, haven't you? What on earth is going on?"
He stopped for a brief moment to scrutinize me more closely, as if trying to read between the lines as to what could have happened to me to render me this upset. He stared at me, and then in a soft, wilted voice he said rather gingerly,
"Has something happened to your father?"
I nodded, and then began to furiously sob.
"My father is dead, Freddie, and it's worse than that. His body parts were lying dismembered across a tree, and his head was decapitated. It was placed on his doorstep strategically." "Oh, my God," said Freddie, looking absolutely appalled. He threw his hand over his open mouth. "Your father was murdered? Is that what you're telling me? Who would do this wicked thing to him? Graham was such a nice guy. Oh, I'm sorry, love. I don't know what to say. There are no words."
I began to blubber, my words becoming inaudible.
"The next-door neighbour's wife thinks a dog man killed him.
His body was badly scratched up by claws. There were canine bites all over him.
Sweetheart,
said my husband, lifting my chin up to his face, so my melancholic eyes met his. With a tissue he began to wipe away my tears for me.
Listen to me, Jamie. The next-door neighbour is probably taking psychedelic mushrooms or something. Let me tell you, something for nothing if I may. There is no such thing as a dog man. The creature is a fictional fabrication that somebody's made up. It simply doesn't exist. But in the minds of the creatively inventive people out there, that's fine. They want to believe he exists. They can believe what they want to. But don't you believe a word of it. Some people imagine these crazy scenarios. But Jamie, a wild animal must have killed your father by the sounds of things. Maybe a bear. I'm sure a bear could pull a head off a body very easily, gouging out the eyes. It wouldn't be impossible in a bear attack. They almost always go for the face, and based on their strength and size, they can do a hell of a lot of damage, believe me, I know. If this was a mother bear with cubs, she could be capable of inciting great wrath on anything that she perceived imposed a threat to her younglings. Believe me, Jamie, there's nothing more dangerous than a mother bear. Do you know that Montana has the largest remaining grizzly bear population in the States? With, of course, the exception of Alaska. And those bears, well, they can be scary, even if sightings of them are rather rare. I believe it was likely a mother grizzly that killed your father. It would certainly explain the scratches over his body and the bites around his face. That is much more of a plausible explanation if you ask me. Dog man, said my husband, smirking. I've never heard anything so insanely ridiculous in my entire life. What will they think of next?
But you don't understand, Freddie, I retorted. My father's head was connivingly placed on the front doorstep. The neighbour said it was like some kind of Machiavellian macabre message. And beyond that, my father's cottage was vandalised brutally. There was straw everywhere, mud, windows broken. Real mayhem everywhere.
Sweetheart, I do not believe that your father's head being left on the doorstep was any kind of insidious message. Maybe it rolled onto the doorstep. As for the creature vandalizing inside the house, that does sound like a bear to me, especially if he was looking for food. And no doubt he would have smelt some on your father's property. Because you have no idea what a bear will do to get to food. Literally anything, causing mayhem in the process. I knew better than to argue with Freddie, who really would never ever give cryptic creatures a passing thought. In his world they simply didn't exist. Everything had a rational, plausible explanation. I didn't buy into his thoughts concerning the matter, but there was no point in arguing with Freddie, because it would be a losing battle. Something had killed my father, and I meant to find out who or what it was, and when I did, I would kill it with my father's rifle to extract my own revenge. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? My husband had asked me, as I packed the cupboards in our camper van, with the clothes I intended to take with me on the journey, for the 16-hour trip to my father's place. I had wisely decided to take the camper van that my husband happened to have bought 6 months ago, on a whim. I had decided I would live in our camper van, given my father's cottage was apparently in such disarray. I mean, don't you need me to be there for the funeral? I think I should be there, love, as a way of paying my last respects to your father. It doesn't seem right for me not to be saying goodbye to him. I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly and looked at my husband through narrowing eyes, avoiding his intrusive inquiring gaze, as I busied myself folding the clothes carefully into drawers. There's no point in your coming with me, Freddie, I said obsequiously. You're needed at the laboratory, aren't you? You've got a backlog of work to do. There are people out there relying on you, waiting for lab reports, eager to know their results. You don't want to hold them up, do you? Besides, you know that this isn't a funeral anyway. Dad would have loathed that. It's just going to be a casual affair. Peggy has arranged for a pastor to say a few words about him.
Then I'm going to scatter, well, everybody's going to scatter my father's ashes in a pretty flowery meadow that my father apparently loved. Then all the people that have arrived on scene will be invited back to the Falconer's cottage for lunch, where Peggy has insisted on laying out a huge spread to celebrate his life. There's going to be a celebration, pig on the spit, I believe, salads and so forth. The Falconers have arranged it all. They love Dad very much. They're kind people. They've organised everything on my account. I'm incredibly grateful to them. As in my state, I couldn't organise a thing.
But that's the whole point, love, don't you see? I need to come with you. Won't it look bad if I'm not there? What kind of a husband would that make me?
Who's going to judge you, Freddie? I'm Dad's daughter, not you. If you're not there, nobody's going to be thinking badly of you. Why should they? We're not burying his body. I'm just throwing out his ashes. Well, we all are.
Yes, but you're my wife, Jamie. I feel I should be there to support you during this grueling time that you're going through. You need me, Jamie. You're broken at the moment. Look at the state you're in. Are you even fit to drive for 18 long hours? Or is it 16? I can't remember. Besides, I was very fond of your father. I would like to be there for him, Jamie. And for you, of course. Most especially for you.
He's dead, Freddie. We can't bring him back. You don't have to be standing over his ashes to honour his memory. You can say a few prayers or something for him.
Look, I know I'm swamped at the laboratory, but I'm sure they'd understand if I took a few days off to be with you. You're grieving, Jamie. You need my support. As I was saying, what kind of a husband would I be if I wasn't there for you?
I told you, Freddie. I almost growled at him. You really don't need to come with me. I'll be absolutely fine on my own. Freddie frowned at me.
Why do I get the funny impression, Jamie, that you really don't want me to come with you? You're giving me the brush off, aren't you? You don't want me there to show solidarity, to give you support.
Look, Freddie, I'll level with you. I don't want you to come all the way to Montana with me. All right, I admitted. I've got a lot of stuff to sort out at Dad's place, that's all. I'd rather do it alone if you don't mind, without you around. I might not hold my emotions together so well, and with you being around, I'll probably just fall apart. Besides, I have no idea how long I need to take at his cottage. It could be a lot longer than I'm anticipating. I need to clean up the place, to make it suitable to rent out. I don't want to sell it, as it meant so much to Dad. I'm going to have to talk to an estate agent about renting the place. My husband shrugged his shoulders, gathered me in his arms, kissing me on my hair.
My word, you do smell lovely. Is that apple shampoo? Look, I wanted to come with you, Jamie, because you're in a bad way at the moment. Your dad's death has taken a dreadful toll on you. I just wanted to be there for you. But if it's space you want, and you seem insistent about it, then space you shall have. Who am I to deprive you of that? I don't want to be cramping your style.
I know you mean well, Freddie, and I love that you care so much, but I do need to do this on my own. And I need some space.
Well, I appreciate that, then.
If my husband was disappointed, he hid it remarkably well. I did feel rather bad for pushing him away, but I couldn't help it. I did not want him to come to Montana with me. My husband believed a grizzly bear had killed my father. I did not. In truth, I wanted to glean all I possibly could about my father's tragic death from the Falconers. I needed to speak to Peggy Falconer privately. It would seem my father had confided in her with personal stuff that Peggy had likely not even shared with her own husband. If my father had told Peggy something in the strictest of confidence, I wanted her to tell me exactly what that was. My father was dead now. What was the point of keeping secrets, especially if it might help me gather more insight as to what had actually happened to my father? I also knew that if there was a dogman loitering around in the woods, I was going to personally take him down. I'd love nothing better to put a bullet through his skull, given he'd killed my father. I wanted to extract my revenge, and I would stop at nothing to get it. I had been on a shooting range with my father once, in my early teens. The instructor described me as having an excellent eye and a natural flair, as I always got the target pretty close to perfect. I had even impressed my father, who described me as a natural marksman. I needed to search for this dogman, or whatever it was that had killed my father. If it had been a mother grizzly that had killed him, I would not want to kill her, because she was doing the most natural thing in the world, protecting her cubs. How could I hate a God-given instinct like that? If that was the case, I would never kill the mother grizzly, even if I encountered her in the wild. But I didn't believe a grizzly had killed my father, as Freddie so obviously did, which was one of the reasons why I never wanted him to come to Montana in the first place. I wasn't so scathingly sceptical about cryptic creatures. Granted, I'd never seen one, but I was open to the fact that they could easily exist. Maybe the difference between me and my husband Freddie really was down to the gift of having an imagination that my scientific husband badly lacked. I could envisage a dogman in my head very clearly, and believe in the likelihood of its existence, but my husband could not. I didn't need a doubting Thomas around to sever my chances to kill this creature. Don't get me wrong, I loved my husband to death, but I needed him to accompany me on this fortuitous visit to my father's cottage like a hole in the head. I had to do this alone without Freddie, putting up barricades to halt my endeavours, which he would almost certainly do, especially if he knew I was frantically scaling the wood groves on this sizable ranch, on the off chance that I might discover this obscure thing that had lightly killed my father. I knew, of course, he'd worry that the grizzly that had killed my dad, which he suspected was the case, would also harm me, should I happen to encounter it. I hasten to say the trip to Montana went as smoothly as could be expected in the circumstances, with just a few hiccups along the way, when on one occasion I encountered roadworks, and on another a rather bad traffic accident, where the people narrowly escaped almost certain death, and were airlifted to hospital by helicopter. Beyond that, the journey was seamless. I was glad I'd brought the camper van with me, as Mr. Falconer had not remotely exaggerated the dreadful state of my father's beautiful cottage, which would need a lot of work to put it back into shape, but luckily most of the damage was just superficial. I was mortified to see the front door had been badly scratched up by claw marks that were in no way human. There were cracked windows throughout the house, and furniture scattered liberally all over the place, so it looked like a tornado had been invited in the cottage to maximize the damage. I knew I'd have to carefully sort through my dad's stuff. I would need to replace the windows and get the scratches on the door sandblasted away before it was suitable to rent again. There was a lot more to be done than I had previously anticipated, but once the cottage was knocked back into shape, it would be very charming indeed. My father had certainly chosen to live in a spectacular, rather prepossessing part of Montana. When I arrived at his cottage, both Peggy and Andreas Falconer were there to greet me, with magnanimous open arms. Tears were shed. The couple swaddled me with such warmth, insisting I join them for dinner that night. They were in their late 30s or early 40s, although I couldn't be sure of their exact ages, as Mr. Falconer looked more to be in his late 50s than approaching 40. When he walked over to me, to embrace me in a bear hug, I noticed he hobbled unsteadily on one of his legs. He observed that I had noticed this, and let out a rather amused chuckle. "You're looking at my leg, are you, Jamie? I lost the damn thing, would you believe, in Afghanistan during the war against Al-Qaeda in 2001. I didn't feel a thing, you know, when it happened. I was flung off my feet backwards, very, very suddenly. I remember looking down on my body to find I was missing a leg. The strangest feeling I've ever experienced in my life. It was so surreal. I guess the adrenaline stopped me from feeling any pain. That came later, and there was a lot of it, especially when I had to learn to walk, and a prosthesis was fitted, which can be very taxing on a stump, causing no end of rashes and inflammation. Do you know, Jamie, this hair of mine," he said, pointing to his frolicking grey hairs that bounced around his square-shaped face,
Well, it was as black as a raven's feathers at one time. But when I came back from Afghanistan, overnight it turned grey."
"It's true, it did," said Peggy, chuckling. "But I think you look very debonair, my love, with the grey hair. It really suits you." Mr. Falconer was tall and slim, with blue eyes and a Middle Eastern complexion, which he'd acquired from spending much time in the sun. His jovial wife Peggy was plump and cheerful, with dark curly hair that in certain lights gave off an enviable auburn hue. Her eyes were green and her skin fair. I was surprised it hadn't experienced any sun damage, living out here in the Montana wilderness. "Oh, it is so good to see you, love," said Peggy. "Your father was such a wonderful man. He will be so greatly missed." The following day, many people I didn't know at all rocked up to celebrate my father's memory and the life he'd lived. Many of them were recent acquaintances that he'd made in Montana over the last 10 years since he'd moved here. All were naturally devastated that he had died so unexpectedly. Most assumed he'd had a nasty run-in with a mother grizzly bear. It would seem Andreas fed them that narrative that he'd been persuaded to use by Fish and Game. Ostensibly, he also wanted to spare them the grisly details of what really had happened to my father. One of the mourners that arrived fortuitously at Peggy's house was my mother, whom I had not seen in many long years. My first unwelcome thought was, what the hell is she doing here? I bristled when I saw her. "I'm so sorry, love," Peggy whispered to me, giving me a comforting nudge. "What was I expected to do? We had to invite her here to honour your father's memory, but we didn't expect her to accept our invitation. She seemed very eager to come." My mother waltzed over to me, dressed to the nine in treacherous killer heels that could take a man's eyes out in a heartbeat if he wasn't careful. She was wearing a long flowing silken summer dress, covered in flowers that billowed around her heels when a touch of breeze teased the fabric. She looked ethereal and delicate, like a beautiful flower on a wild alpine field, only one that had manipulated nature far too much with a plethora of cosmetic procedures that had done their damnedest to hold back the cruel hands of time. But despite her very best efforts, it was easy to tell my mother was no spring chicken, even if her skin was as tight as the awning over a shop window. My mother was meticulously, if not perfectly groomed, with long nails as terrifying as her heels. My mother's brown shoulder-length hair had been heavily highlighted in different shades of browns. It looked rather fetching on her, I begrudgingly had to admit. In fact, she did not look half so bad for a woman of her advancing years, even if her skin looked as unnaturally smooth as that of a lizard. There was none of this aging gracefully with my mother. She would grab age as if it was a squirming rat and throttle it within an inch of its life so it wouldn't go anywhere near her. "Hello, Jamie," said my mother tightly, a nervous smile twitching on her glossy scarlet lips. I was relieved she didn't gregariously throw her arms around me, for I'm not sure how I would have reacted had she done that. She knew better than to shower me with affection, and probably thought she had to walk on eggshells around me, which was likely true. "It's good to see you, love," she said to me, her false eyelashes blinking as she eyed me a little apprehensively through her green eyes, as if she was terribly afraid I might spit poison at her and swallow her alive like a python. "I knew you probably didn't want me here, love, but I wanted to come to say farewell to your father. It was the right thing to do, to honour his memory, to celebrate his wonderful life. Your father never would have wanted a funeral, but look how many people have showed up today to remember him. He'd have loved so many people being here to celebrate his life like this." I glared at my mother defiantly, with a hostile expression on my face. "Why do you care now when he's dead? You didn't care when he was alive, did you?" I almost growled. "It's a bit too late to care now, don't you think? You really have a low opinion of me, don't you, love? I'm not the monster you paint me out to be, Jamie. Granted, I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be either. I admit I've done things in my life that I'm not proud of,
But haven't we all made mistakes along the way? But show me someone that hasn't messed up, and then I'll show you a saint. Contrary to what you may believe, I cared for your father a great deal," she said, patting her heart. "I was absolutely devastated to learn about the tragic way in which he died. It's too terrible for words, Jamie. I just cannot believe that a female grizzly bear did that to him." She pulled out a tissue from her leather purse and dabbed away at a few crocodile tears from her cheeks. Was she really crying, I wondered in disgust. She had walked out on Dad all those years ago, and now she pretended to care about him and was feigning tears. She deserved an Academy Award on her performance. "You didn't care for Dad," I said scorchingly. "Is this some kind of warped, sick joke? The only thing that you've ever cared about, Mum, is yourself and that personal trainer you married. Still smitten by him, are you? Still hopelessly in love with his six-pack and gargantuan biceps that would make Popeye cry with envy and feel he needed to eat barrel loads of spinach to just keep up with it?" "Now, Jamie, there's no need to be so cutting like that. If you must know, me and Prt2of4 are no longer together. The man was such a player, but I never knew that when we got together. He had such a wandering eye. What on earth was I thinking marrying a man like him, who doesn't know the meaning of the word being faithful?"
"Sounds like you got a taste of your own medicine, Mum. Did he run off with someone else when he got tired of you?" I said scathingly. "Spit you out, did he, when he got bored?"
"Jamie, must you be so tactlessly unkind? You really know how to dig in the knife where it hurts." "All right, I will admit," said my mother, waving her arm in front of her face, "I made a big mistake leaving your father. If I could have gone back in time, I would never have left him in the first place. I was just a little hasty. I thought I was in love with Prt2. Can you blame me? Prt2 turned up the charm. He made me feel like such a princess, until he didn't anymore. He gave me so much attention, and I guess I just got swept up in the moment like you do. I was naive to believe all the stuff he said to me."
"Mum, do you realise how pathetic you sound? You've dumped Dad for your personal trainer, and now you regret it? Dad loved you, Mum. He'd have moved heaven and earth for you, but you threw your marriage to the wolves, demanded a divorce, and sauntered off with his personal trainer, who charmed the pants off you, until finally he got bored of you. I knew it would happen. In the meantime, you broke Dad's heart into smithereens. Dad never recovered after you left. I don't think he ever got over your leaving, Mum. He really, really loved the bones of you, and I knew you'd never find a love like that again. That personal trainer only liked you because you were attractive, some eye candy he could show off to his friends to boost his ego. But did he care about who you were as a spiritual being? Absolutely not. I can tell you this for nothing, Mum. His attraction towards you was hollow, superficial, and shallow, as yours was towards him, I'm most sure.
Don't you think I know that, love? And don't you think I regret it? Of course I do. I made mistakes, and I admit to them. I hope you're happy now. Prt2 was not who I thought he was. In the beginning, as I was saying, he was utterly charming. I thought I was madly in love with him as a result. But then the cracks in our relationship began to show. Through the blistering veneer, I realized there was nothing to the man at all. I was so angry with myself for leaving your father. Your father would never have cheated on me like Prt2 did.
How did you find out Prt2 was cheating on you? I said, raising a brow. My mother began to dab her face with a tissue, as if recalling the memory of Prt2's treachery had made her break out in quite the sweat.
Would you believe it, Jamie? I returned home one night, a day earlier from a weekend I spent with Sue Dyer. You do remember her, don't you? We were best friends in junior high together. Anyway, she wasn't feeling great, so I came home early. I found Prt2 frolicking wildly in the bed with another woman. And that was that. You can't unsee that kind of thing. I left him at once. I'm not going to put up with a man who treats me with such scant disregard. So there we are. That is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and the story is warming up. It's getting very exciting. So tune in and don't miss out, because it's a very exciting story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.